"Officer, I want her removed now. She stole that seat. She's aggressive, and she doesn't belong here." The shrill voice of Brenda Miller cut through the pressurized silence of the first-class cabin like a serrated knife. All eyes turned to seat 2A, where 17-year-old Kennedy Washington sat calmly, her fingers resting lightly on a leather-bound book. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even stand up. She simply watched the chaos unfold with terrifying composure. When Officer Higgins finally stomped down the aisle, handcuffs rattling, the passengers braced for a scene. But when the cop snatched Kennedy's ID and read the last name printed on it, the color drained from his face. He didn't arrest the teen. He froze, looked at the screaming woman, and realized with horror that the flight wasn't just delayed. It was about to become a crime scene, and the victim wasn't who anyone thought. The humid air of Miami International Airport clung to passengers as they shuffled through the jet bridge, eager to escape the Florida heat for the cool, recycled atmosphere of Atlantic Air Flight 492, bound for New York. It was a Tuesday, typically a slow travel day, but the chaos at Gate D12 suggested otherwise. Kennedy Washington adjusted the strap of her vintage canvas messenger bag. At 17, Kennedy carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed older than her years. She was dressed simply: dark denim jeans, a crisp white linen button-down, and clean white sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in chaotic but controlled braids. She wasn't trying to be noticed. She just wanted to get home. She approached the gate agent, a harried-looking man named Greg who was typing furiously on his terminal. "Boarding pass, please," Greg said without looking up. Kennedy held out her phone. The screen glowed with the QR code and the bold letters. "Seat 2A, first class." Greg scanned it. The machine let out a pleasant ping. He paused, finally looking up. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the girl standing before him. It wasn't confusion exactly, but a flicker of surprise. Young black teenagers didn't often fly solo in the front of the plane on this route. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Washington," Greg said, his voice taking on a sudden, respectful polish. "Thank you, Greg," she replied, noting his name tag. Kennedy walked down the jet bridge, the transition from the noisy terminal to the hushed, carpeted exclusivity of the aircraft, offering a brief moment of peace. She stepped onto the plane and turned left. The flight attendant, a woman named Patricia with a tight bun and a tighter smile, glanced at Kennedy's ticket. "Row 2, window," Patricia said, pointing. Her tone was professional, but dismissive, her eyes already darting to the businessman behind Kennedy. Kennedy found 2A. It was a wide, plush leather seat with a pre-departure bottle of water waiting in the console. She stowed her bag in the overhead bin, retrieved her book, a heavy biography of Thurgood Marshall, and sat down. She buckled her seatbelt, put on her noise-cancelling headphones, and closed her eyes. That was when the atmosphere shifted. A commotion at the front of the cabin made Kennedy open one eye. Standing in the aisle, blocking the flow of boarding passengers, was a woman who looked like she had been designed in a laboratory to complain to a manager. Brenda Miller was in her late 40s, wearing a leopard print blouse that cost too much and looked too cheap, and carrying a Louis Vuitton bag that she wielded like a weapon. She was red-faced, sweating, and pointing a manicured finger directly at Kennedy. "Excuse me," Brenda barked at Patricia. "There must be a mistake." Patricia, whose smile was beginning to crack, stepped forward. "What seems to be the problem, Miss Miller?" "The problem," Brenda hissed, loud enough for the entire first 6 rows to hear, "is that there is a child in my seat, or at least in the cabin where I am supposed to be sitting. I paid full fare for first class. I demand a quiet environment. Having her here is unacceptable." Kennedy didn't move. She didn't pause her music, though she could hear every word through the silence between tracks. She kept her gaze fixed on the seat back in front of her. "Ms. Miller, let me check your boarding pass," Patricia said, her patience thinning. Brenda shoved her paper ticket at the flight attendant. "I am in 2B, the aisle. But I want the window, and I certainly don't want to sit next to an unaccompanied minor who probably snuck up here from economy while you weren't looking." Patricia looked at the ticket, then at Kennedy. She walked over to 2A. "Miss, can I see your ticket again?" Kennedy sighed. It was a small, weary sound. She unlocked her phone and held it up. Patricia looked at it. 2A. It was valid. "She has the correct seat, Miss Miller," Patricia said, handing the ticket back to Brenda. "She is in 2A. You are in 2B. Please take your seat so we can finish boarding." Brenda's face went a shade of purple that clashed violently with her blouse. She stepped closer to Kennedy, looming over the girl. "I don't believe it," Brenda spat. "Show me the ticket. I want to see it." Kennedy finally turned her head. She slid her headphones down to her neck. Her eyes were dark, calm, and unnervingly direct. "My ticket has been verified by the gate agent and the flight attendant," Kennedy said, her voice steady and articulate. "Please stop hovering over me. You're blocking the aisle." "Don't you speak to me like that," Brenda screeched. She turned to the rest of the cabin, seeking allies. "Can you believe this? The disrespect? I bet she used a stolen credit card. Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in first class?" A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. A man in 3A buried his face in a newspaper. No one spoke up. "Ma'am, sit down," Patricia said, her voice losing its customer service sweetness. "No!" Brenda slammed her bag onto the empty seat of 2B. "I am a Platinum Medallion member. I know the rules. If a passenger is disruptive or makes others uncomfortable, they can be removed. She is making me uncomfortable. She looks suspicious. I want her moved to economy. Right now." Kennedy put her headphones back on. It was a deliberate, dismissive gesture that infuriated Brenda beyond measure. Brenda reached out and, with a shocking lack of inhibition, slapped the headphones off Kennedy's head. They clattered onto the floor. The cabin went dead silent. Kennedy didn't flinch physically, but her jaw tightened. She looked down at her expensive headphones lying on the carpet, then slowly up at Brenda. "You just assaulted me," Kennedy said softly. "I removed an obstruction so you could hear me," Brenda yelled. "Stewardess, did you see that? She threw her headphones at me." Patricia stepped in between them, her hands raised. "That is enough. Ms. Miller, do not touch the other passenger. Sit down immediately, or I will have you removed." "You're going to remove me?" Brenda laughed, a high-pitched, incredulous sound. "Do you know who my husband is? He's a senior partner at Davis & Cox. I will sue this airline into the ground if you touch me. I want the pilot. Get the pilot." By now, boarding had completely stalled. A line of economy passengers stretched back into the jet bridge, craning their necks to see what the holdup was. The air inside the plane was getting hot and stuffy. The pilot, Captain Harrison, emerged from the cockpit. He was a tall man with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He assessed the situation quickly, a hysterical woman standing over a seated teenager and a flight attendant looking ready to scream. "What is going on here?" Captain Harrison asked, his voice booming. "Captain," Brenda said, smoothing her blouse and instantly changing her demeanor to that of a victim. "This person is in my seat. She's been verbally abusive, and I believe she is a security threat. She refused to show her ticket, and she threw her electronics at me. I don't feel safe flying with her." Captain Harrison looked at Kennedy. "Miss, is this true?" Kennedy picked up her headphones. "No, sir. I am in my assigned seat, 2A. This woman is in 2B. She demanded I move to economy because she doesn't think I belong here. Then she slapped my headphones off my head. "Liar!" Brenda shrieked. "She's a liar!" Captain Harrison looked at Patricia. Patricia nodded at Kennedy. "The young lady is telling the truth, Captain. Ms. Miller has been the aggressor." Harrison turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, you need to sit down and lower your voice, or you will not be flying with us today." Brenda's eyes narrowed. She realized she was losing the room. She needed to escalate. She needed to make this a matter of safety, not just preference. She pulled out her phone and started recording. "I am recording this," she announced. "I am being discriminated against because I am a white woman standing up for safety. This girl looks like a thug. I saw her texting someone about blowing this place up. I saw it." A gasp rippled through the cabin. The accusation of a bomb threat or terrorism was the nuclear option in air travel. Once those words were spoken, protocol took over. Captain Harrison's face hardened. "Ma'am, that is a serious accusation." "I saw it," Brenda lied, doubling down. "She texted, 'It's about to blow. Check her phone. I demand you check her phone.'" Kennedy looked at the captain. "I was texting my father," I said. "It's about to blow over, I hope, regarding a storm in New York." "She's lying," Brenda screamed. "She's a terrorist. Get her off." Captain Harrison sighed. He had no choice now. An accusation of a threat, however spurious it seemed, had to be investigated. He couldn't just take off. "Patricia, call the gate. We need Port Authority police," Harrison said quietly. "Thank God," Brenda shouted triumphantly. "Finally some law and order." She glared at Kennedy. "You're done, little girl. You are going to jail." Kennedy didn't respond. She simply unlocked her phone, opened her messaging app, and tapped a contact labeled Dad. She typed a single message. Code red, Miami, Flight 492, Miller. She hit send, then locked the phone and placed it face down on the tray table. 10 minutes later, the wail of sirens could be heard outside on the tarmac. 2 Port Authority officers boarded the plane. The lead officer, a burly man named Higgins with a buzz cut and a tired expression, walked into first class. "Who's the problem?" Higgins asked, looking around. "Her!" Brenda pointed a shaking finger at Kennedy. "The girl in 2A. She made a bomb threat. She assaulted me. I want to press charges." Officer Higgins looked at the small, calm girl in 2A, and then at the frantic woman in the leopard print. He'd seen this dynamic 1,000 times, but he had to follow procedure. "Miss," Higgins said to Kennedy, stepping into the row, "I need you to grab your bags and come with me. We need to clear this up off the plane." "She didn't do anything," a passenger in 3B finally shouted. "That lady is crazy." "Stay out of this, sir," Higgins warned. He looked back at Kennedy. "Let's go, miss. Don't make this difficult." Brenda smirked, crossing her arms. "That's right. Get the trash out of here." Kennedy stood up. She moved slowly, deliberately. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim, black leather wallet. She didn't reach for her ID immediately. Instead, she looked Officer Higgins in the eye. "Officer," she said, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the plane. "Before I step off this plane, I am legally required to inform you that removing me without cause triggers a federal violation under the Washington Clearance Protocol. I advise you to check the manifest for my full legal name." Higgins frowned. "Washington Clearance? What are you talking about?" "ID. Now." Kennedy handed him her driver's license. Higgins took it. He looked at the photo. Then he looked at the name. Kennedy A. Washington. Address, 1600 Pennsylvania. No, that wasn't it. The address was a private estate in Martha's Vineyard. But the name triggered a memory. A briefing he had received only 2 weeks ago regarding VIP protection and high-risk diplomatic family members. Then he looked at the second card she handed him. It wasn't a credit card. It was a heavy, titanium card with a gold chip and the seal of the Department of Transportation, but overlaid with a horrifyingly specific insignia. The Federal Aviation Oversight Board, Chairman's family detail. Higgins felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. The name Washington in the aviation world didn't just mean a city. It meant Reginald Washington, the man who had just been appointed as the supreme litigator for the FAA and the majority shareholder of the conglomerate that owned the fuel contracts for every major airline on the East Coast. If this was his daughter. Higgins looked up from the card. He looked at Brenda, who was grinning like a shark. Then he looked back at Kennedy. "Ms. Washington?" Higgins asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Yes, officer. And the woman standing there," Kennedy pointed calmly at Brenda, "has accused me of terrorism, which, as you know, is a federal felony if false. She also assaulted me. I would like to file a formal report. Here. Now." Brenda's smile faltered. "Why are you talking to her? Arrest her." Higgins took a deep breath. The power dynamic in the cabin had just shifted so violently, the air pressure seemed to drop. "Ma'am," Higgins said, turning his back on Kennedy to face Brenda. "You need to retrieve your bag." "Finally!" Brenda reached for her bag. "Good. Get her out." "No, ma'am," Higgins said, his hand resting on his taser, his eyes cold and hard. "I'm not talking to her. I'm talking to you. You are under arrest for making a false report of a terrorist threat and assault on a federal dependent. Get your bag. Now." The silence that followed was louder than a jet engine. The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute, the kind of silence usually reserved for funerals or bomb disposal units. Brenda Miller stood frozen, her hand half extended toward her Louis Vuitton bag, her mouth agape in a perfect O of shock. "Excuse me?" Brenda choked out, her voice trembling with indignation rather than fear. "You think you can arrest me? Do you have any idea?" "Ma'am, stop talking," Officer Higgins said, his voice dropping an octave into his command presence. "Register. You just accused this young woman of a bomb threat on a commercial aircraft. In a post-9/11 world, that is a federal felony. We treat that with zero tolerance." "But she..." Brenda pointed a shaking finger at Kennedy, who was now calmly rebuckling her seatbelt. "She is a threat. Look at her. She's smug. She thinks she owns the place." "I don't think I own the place, Miss Miller," Kennedy said, her voice cool and level. "But my father's firm does own the liability insurance policy for this airline, and I believe the specific clause regarding passenger harassment is about to become very relevant." Brenda let out a screech of laughter. "Oh, listen to her. Daddy's insurance policy. Officer, are you going to let this brat talk down to a taxpayer?" Higgins stepped closer, invading Brenda's personal space. "Miss Miller, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Brenda's eyes bulged. "I will do no such thing. This is entrapment. This is reverse racism. I am calling my husband." She fumbled for her phone again, her fingers sliding over the screen. David, pick up. I'm being assaulted by the police and some hoodlum on the plane." Before she could hit dial, Higgins grabbed her wrist. It wasn't gentle. He twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her to drop the phone. It clattered onto the floor next to Kennedy's seat. "Ow! You're hurting me! Police brutality!" Brenda screamed, thrashing against him. "Stop resisting!" Higgins barked. His partner, a younger officer named Ramirez, rushed forward to assist. Together they manhandled Brenda into the aisle. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut, click, 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 echoed through the cabin. "You're making a huge mistake," Brenda wailed, tears streaming down her face now, ruining her heavy mascara. "My husband is David Miller. Miller, Weiss and Thorpe. He plays golf with the mayor." You'll be directing traffic in the Everglades by tomorrow morning." Kennedy picked up her book again. She looked at Patricia, the flight attendant who was trembling near the galley. "Patricia," Kennedy said politely. "Could I get that water now? My throat is a little dry." Patricia stared at her, then snapped into action. "Yes. Yes, of course, Miss Washington. Right away. Would you like ice?" "No ice, thank you." As the officers began to drag a kicking and screaming Brenda toward the exit, Kennedy spoke up one last time. "Officer Higgins?" Higgins paused, sweat beading on his forehead, holding Brenda by the arm. "Yes, Ms. Washington?" "Please make sure you secure her phone as evidence," Kennedy said, pointing to the device on the floor. "It contains the recording she made, which will prove she lied about the text message. It also likely contains the texts she sent to her husband, admitting she was trying to get me kicked off. I'd hate for that to get lost." Higgins nodded. "Ramirez, bag the phone." "No, that's my private property," Brenda shrieked as Ramirez scooped it up. "It's evidence now, ma'am," Ramirez said. As they dragged her off the plane, Brenda's screams faded into the jet bridge. "I'll sue you all. I'll own this airline. The cabin door was shut. The silence returned. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, awkward silence of 50 people realizing they had almost witnessed a lynching, and that the only reason it hadn't happened was because the victim happened to be the most powerful person in the room. Captain Harrison cleared his throat. He looked at Kennedy. He looked terrified. "Ms. Washington," the captain said, removing his cap. "On behalf of Atlantic Air, I want to apologize profusely for this incident. We had no idea." "That I was Reginald Washington's daughter?" Kennedy finished for him. She didn't smile. "Well, yes. But even so, no passenger should be treated that way." "You're right, Captain," Kennedy said. "They shouldn't. But if my name was Kennedy Smith and my father was a plumber, I'd be in handcuffs right now, wouldn't I?" Harrison opened his mouth, but no words came out. He knew the answer. Everyone knew the answer. "I don't need an apology, Captain," Kennedy said, opening her book. "I just need to get to New York. I have a debate tournament tomorrow, and this delay is eating into my prep time." "Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am." Harrison practically ran back to the cockpit. As the plane pushed back from the gate, the passenger in 2B, Brenda's empty seat, remained vacant. It was a stark reminder of the karma that had just been served. But the story wasn't over. As the plane taxied, Kennedy pulled her phone out one more time. Her father had replied, "Dad." "Received?" "Miller? David Miller's wife?" Kennedy. "The same. She's in custody. Miami PD. False report of terrorism." "Dad. Understood. I'm making a call. By the time you land, the landscape will be different. Love you, Bean." Kennedy. "Love you too." She put the phone away. She knew what making a call meant in her father's world. Brenda Miller thought she had just missed a flight. She was about to find out she had missed her entire life. The flight to New York was uneventful, but the atmosphere in first class remained tense. Every time Kennedy moved, to turn a page, to sip her water, passengers flinched as if she were a radioactive isotope that might go critical. Kennedy ignored them. She was used to it. Being a black girl in spaces designated for the wealthy white elite often meant existing as a spectacle. Today, she had just turned the spectacle back on the audience. When the plane touched down at JFK, Kennedy was the first one off. She was met at the gate not by a regular escort, but by a man in a sharp black suit wearing an earpiece. This was Marcus, her father's head of security in New York. "Rough flight, Miss Kennedy?" Marcus asked, taking her bag. "Interesting flight, Marcus. Very educational. Your father is waiting in the car. He thought you might want to debrief." They walked through the terminal, bypassing baggage claim. Outside, a sleek black SUV was idling. Kennedy climbed into the back seat. Reginald Washington was waiting. He was a mountain of a man, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than most cars. He had the kind of presence that could suck the oxygen out of a boardroom. But when he saw Kennedy, his face softened. "You okay, Bean?" he asked, hugging her. "I'm fine, Dad." She was loud, but sloppy. Reginald nodded, his face hardening again. "Brenda Miller, I looked into it. Her husband is David Miller, senior partner at Davis & Cox. They do a lot of contract work for the airline's ground operations." "She said she was going to sue," Kennedy said. "She can try," Reginald chuckled darkly. "But she's going to have a hard time finding a lawyer." "Why?" Reginald handed Kennedy a tablet. "Take a look at the news." Kennedy looked at the screen. It was a live feed from a Miami news station. The headline scrolled in bold red at the bottom. "Wife of prominent Miami attorney arrested for airport bomb hoax." The video showed Brenda, looking disheveled and frantic, being led into a police cruiser. But that wasn't the twist. The twist was the second headline below it. "Breaking. Davis & Cox drop senior partner amidst scandal." "Dad!" Kennedy looked up. "You moved that fast?" "I didn't have to move much," Reginald said, pouring himself a sparkling water. "I simply called the managing partner at Davis & Cox. I reminded him that my firm, Washington Global, is currently reviewing our legal representation for the upcoming merger with Atlantic Air, a contract worth about $40 million a year in billing." Kennedy's eyes widened. And I told him I couldn't possibly do business with a firm whose senior leadership harbors domestic terrorists. I told him that the behavior of a partner's spouse reflects on the judgment of the partner. "So they fired him." "They placed him on immediate unpaid leave pending an investigation," Reginald corrected, "which is corporate speak for he's done." But that's not the best part. There's more. I also called the airline's CEO, Jim Sterling. "We play tennis." I told Jim that if he allows Brenda Miller on any Atlantic Air flight ever again, or any of its partners, I will pull our liability coverage. Do you know what happens to an airline without liability coverage? "They can't fly," Kennedy whispered. "Exactly." Jim put her on the no-fly list, not just for Atlantic. He shared the incident report with the FAA. She's blacklisted, globally. She can't fly on any US carrier. She can't even take a bus if it's TSA regulated. Kennedy looked out the window as the New York skyline whizzed by. "Her last name cancelled the trip," she murmured. "Her last name cancelled everything," Reginald said. "But here is the real twist, Kennedy. The karma isn't just about her losing her flight or her status." He tapped the tablet again. "Look at this." Kennedy swiped to the next article. It was a blog post from a local Miami watchdog group. "Real estate mogul Brenda Miller under investigation for housing discrimination." "She's a real estate agent?" Kennedy asked. "She was a real estate agent," Reginald said. "Specifically, she managed high-end rentals in South Beach. Apparently, she has a history of rejecting applications from people who look like, well, like us. People had complained for years, but nothing stuck. She was too powerful. Her husband protected her. And now that she's a nationally disgraced bomb hoaxer, the gloves are off. The housing authority just raided her office an hour ago. They found files marked with codes. Apparently, C-type meant colored. They're going to indict her on federal housing discrimination charges. Kennedy sat back, stunned, all because she couldn't stand seeing me in seat 2A. "Arrogance is a hell of a drug, Bean," Reginald said. "It makes you think you're invincible, until you run into something solid." "Am I the solid thing?" Kennedy asked. Reginald smiled. "You're the rock, baby. You're the rock." The car turned onto Park Avenue. Kennedy felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Brenda Miller had destroyed her own life in the span of 30 minutes because of hate. It was pathetic. But there was one loose end. "Dad, what about the officer? Higgins?" Reginald paused. "What about him?" He was dismissive at first, but he did the right thing in the end. He was scared, but he arrested her. "He did his job only when he saw who you were," Reginald noted. "I know," Kennedy said, but he stood up to her. "And he didn't rough me up. In this world, that counts for something. Don't crush him." Reginald looked at his daughter with pride. "Mercy? That's a Washington trait, too. All right, I'll make a note. Officer Higgins keeps his job. Maybe even gets a commendation for thwarting a security threat." But the flight attendant, Kennedy's eyes narrowed slightly. "Patricia, she watched me get assaulted and did nothing until the captain showed up. She was ready to kick me off." "Patricia," Reginald said, pulling out his phone, "might find herself looking for a new career. Perhaps something that doesn't involve customer service." As the car stopped in front of their penthouse, Kennedy's phone buzzed. It was a notification from social media. Someone on the plane had uploaded the video. Title: "Karen Gets Destroyed by Teen in First Class. Instant Karma." The views were climbing by the thousands every second. "It's viral," Kennedy said. "Good," Reginald replied. "Let the world see. But Kennedy, there is one more thing you need to know. Something Brenda said about you texting." "Yeah?" "She lied. She lied about the bomb," Reginald said seriously. "But she wasn't lying about the danger. I didn't want to tell you this over the phone, but the reason you have that specific clearance card, the reason I have extra security on you." Kennedy turned to her father. "Dad." "What is it?" Reginald's face was grave. "David Miller isn't just a lawyer. His firm represents the consortium we are fighting in the FAA lawsuit, the one about the fuel regulations." Kennedy felt a chill. "Wait, you think this wasn't random?" "I think Brenda Miller is a racist idiot," Reginald said. "But I think she recognized you, not as Kennedy Washington, the teen, but as the Washington girl her husband has been ranting about at dinner for months. He's been trying to find leverage on me, dirt on my family." "So she tried to manufacture some," Kennedy realized. "She tried to get me arrested to pressure you." "Exactly," Reginald said. "She thought if she could get you booked for a felony, I'd drop the lawsuit to keep you out of jail. It was a set-up, Kennedy, a clumsy, hateful, desperate set-up." "She didn't just want my seat," Kennedy whispered. "She wanted my future." "And instead," Reginald said, opening the car door, "she lost hers." The morning after the incident, Kennedy Washington didn't wake up to sunlight streaming through her penthouse windows. She woke up to the digital roar of the entire world. Her phone, which she had left on Do Not Disturb, had accumulated thousands of notifications. The video of Brenda Miller, now dubbed First Class Karen, had crossed platforms from TikTok to Twitter, then to Instagram, and finally to the morning news cycle. It had 50 million views in 12 hours. Kennedy sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. She clicked on a link her best friend, Maya, had sent her. It was a clip from Good Morning America. The hosts were sitting with grave expressions, the footage playing in a loop behind them. Brenda screaming, the slap of the headphones, the arrival of Officer Higgins. "A shocking display of entitlement and racial profiling in the skies," the anchor said. "But the story has taken a darker turn. Sources confirm that the woman, Brenda Miller, attempted to frame 17-year-old Kennedy Washington for a bomb threat. Kennedy, a top-ranking national debater and daughter of aviation magnate Reginald Washington, maintained her composure throughout the ordeal. Kennedy felt a strange dissociation. They were talking about her like she was a symbol, a statue of stoicism. They didn't see her shaking hands or the way her heart had hammered against her ribs. She went downstairs. Her father was already at the dining table, surrounded by 3 aides and a very stressed-looking PR specialist named Cynthia. "She needs to make a statement," Cynthia was saying, pacing the floor. "The narrative is slipping. The right-wing blogs are already trying to spin this." "She is a child," Reginald growled, not looking up from his tablet. "She is not making a statement. She is going to school." "Dad," Kennedy said from the stairs. The room went silent. Reginald looked up, his face softening instantly. "Morning, Bean. You hungry?" "I'm not hungry," Kennedy said, walking over to the table. She looked at Cynthia. "What do you mean the narrative is slipping?" Cynthia hesitated, looking at Reginald for permission. Reginald sighed and nodded. "Brenda's husband, David Miller," Cynthia said, pulling up a video on her laptop. "He went on the Patriot Hour last night. It's a fringe network, but it has a huge audience. Watch." She pressed play. David Miller sat in a studio chair, looking haggard but defiant. He was a handsome man in a predatory way, with slicked-back hair and a suit that cost more than the camera filming him. "My wife is the victim here," David Miller said smoothly into the camera. She was under extreme stress. She saw suspicious activity. In this day and age, if you see something, you say something. And because the person she saw happened to be of a certain demographic, suddenly my wife is a racist? No. She's a patriot. The host nodded sympathetically. "And the girl? The Washington girl?" David Miller's eyes narrowed. "A provocateur. We have reports that she was making gang signs at my wife before the recording started. We believe she goaded Brenda into a reaction so she could film it. It's a setup. The Washington family is known for these aggressive tactics. They want to destroy my law firm because we represent the real working Americans against their corporate monopoly." Kennedy stared at the screen. "Gang signs. I was reading Thurgood Marshall." "It doesn't matter what you were doing," Cynthia said gently. "It matters what they can make people believe. He's trying to muddy the waters. He's trying to make this a he said, she said political fight so the DA will be scared to prosecute." Kennedy felt a cold anger rising in her chest. It was different from the fear on the plane. This was intellectual fury. "He's lying," Kennedy said, "and he's using his platform to slander a minor. Isn't that actionable?" "It is," Reginald said, his voice like grinding stones. "And we will sue him for defamation. But that takes yours. The damage is happening now." "He mentioned your debate tournament," Cynthia added quietly. Kennedy froze. "What?" "Later in the interview," Cynthia fast-forwarded. "This girl is supposed to be some genius debater. She's competing at the Tri-State Finals tomorrow at Columbia University. I challenge anyone to go there and ask her the hard questions. Ask her why she hates patriots." "He doxed me," Kennedy whispered. "He told his followers where I'm going to be." Reginald stood up, slamming his hand on the table. "That's it. You're not going. We're pulling you out. It's too dangerous." "No," Kennedy said immediately. "Kennedy, there will be protesters. Crazy people. I cannot risk your safety." "If I don't go," Kennedy said, her voice shaking but firm, "then he wins. He proves that he can bully us, that he can displace me. Again. First from my seat, now from my life." She looked her father in the eye. "You raised me to fight, Dad. You named me Kennedy. You raised me in the legacy of giants. You think Thurgood Marshall would stay home because some racist lawyer went on TV?" Reginald stared at her. He saw the steel in her spine. It was the same steel he saw in the mirror every morning. He let out a long breath. Then he looked at Marcus, his head of security. "Marcus," Reginald said, "I want the team doubled. No, tripled. I want a perimeter around Columbia University that the Secret Service would envy. If anyone even looks at her wrong, I want them on the ground." "Yes, sir," Marcus said, already dialing his phone. Kennedy turned to Cynthia. "And Cynthia, I'll make a statement. But not to the press. I'll make it on the stage." The atmosphere at the Columbia University debate hall was electric, but for all the wrong reasons. Usually these events were quiet, academic affairs. The rustling of index cards, the scratching of pens, the polite applause of proud parents. Today it looked like a siege. Private security guards in black suits lined the walls. NYPD officers were stationed at the entrances. Outside, a small group of protesters with signs reading "Free Brenda" and "Justice for the Millers" were shouting at passing cars, but they were kept far back by the police line. Inside, the tension was thick. The other students whispered as Kennedy walked in, flanked by Marcus and 2 other guards. She kept her head high, clutching her case of evidence cards. She wore her team blazer, navy blue with the crest of her prep school, and her expression was unreadable. Her debate partner, a nervous boy named Sam, looked like he might throw up. "You okay, Sam?" Kennedy asked, setting her case down. "Am I okay?" "Kennedy, there are snipers on the roof. I saw them. They're on our side, Sam. Focus. The topic is civil liberties versus national security. We are the affirmative. We are arguing that security cannot exist without the foundation of liberty." "Right, right," Sam breathed. The rounds began. Kennedy was in the zone. She dismantled a team from Scarsdale in the quarterfinals. She crushed a team from Stuyvesant in the semis. Her arguments were sharp, precise, and devastatingly articulate. She wasn't just debating, she was channeling her fury into logic. Then came the final round. The auditorium filled up, and there, sitting in the front row, right behind the opposing team, was David Miller. He wasn't alone. He was sitting next to the opposing debater, a tall, arrogant-looking boy with the same slicked-back hair. "That's Chase Miller," Sam whispered, his face draining of color. "That's his son. We're debating his son." Kennedy looked at the opposing table. Chase Miller was smirking at her. He had the same predatory look as his father. It was a setup. The brackets had been manipulated, or maybe it was just fate. But here they were. The topic for the final round was a variation. Resolved, the restriction of individual rights is justified in the face of imminent threats. Chase Miller was the affirmative. He was arguing for the restriction of rights, arguing for profiling, arguing for exactly what his mother had done. Kennedy was the negative. Chase opened with a polished, aggressive speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, pacing the stage, "we live in a dangerous world, a world where hesitation kills. If we are too afraid to act, too afraid to offend, we invite destruction. Profiling is not prejudice, it is pattern recognition. It is survival." He looked directly at Kennedy. "Some people think their personal comfort is more important than the safety of the majority. They are wrong." David Miller nodded from the front row, a smug smile on his face. He crossed his arms, staring at Reginald Washington, who was sitting on the other side of the aisle, looking like a thunderhead about to burst. It was Kennedy's turn for the rebuttal. She stood up. She walked to the podium. She didn't use index cards. She adjusted the microphone and looked out at the silent room. She looked at Chase. She looked at David Miller. "My opponent," Kennedy began, her voice ringing clear and steady, "speaks of survival. He speaks of pattern recognition. He argues that fear justifies the erasure of rights. He argues that if someone looks like a threat, they should be treated as one. She paused. Yesterday I sat on an airplane. I was reading a book. I was minding my own business, and because of the pattern recognition my opponent champions, I was assaulted. I was humiliated. I was accused of a felony. Not because I was a threat, but because a woman decided that my existence in a space she coveted was, in itself, dangerous. David Miller stood up. Objection. She's making it personal. Stick to the topic. The moderator, a stern professor, banged his gavel. Sit down, Mr. Miller. This is a debate. The speaker has the floor. Kennedy didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on David. It is personal, Kennedy said, her voice rising with controlled power. Civil liberties are always personal, because when you strip them away, you don't strip them from a statistic. You strip them from a human being. You strip them from a 17-year-old girl trying to get home to her father. She turned back to Chase. You argue that safety requires the sacrifice of dignity. But I ask you, whose safety and whose dignity? When your mother, excuse me, when a hypothetical citizen uses the police as a weapon to enforce their own prejudice, that is not national security. That is terrorism. It is the terrorism of the privileged against the marginalized. The room was deadly silent. Chase Miller looked stunned. He had prepared for academic arguments, not this visceral, real-world dismantling. The affirmative argues that we must sacrifice rights for order, Kennedy concluded. I argue that an order built on the oppression of the innocent is not order at all. It is tyranny. And tyranny, no matter how well-dressed, no matter how expensive its suit, ultimately collapses under the weight of its own lies. She sat down. The applause started slowly, then erupted. It was thunderous. Students were standing up. Even the judges looked moved. David Miller was red-faced. He was furious. He stood up again, ignoring the protocol, ready to shout, ready to make a scene. But he never got the chance. The doors at the back of the auditorium burst open. Federal agents, nobody move. 6 agents in FBI windbreakers marched down the aisles. They weren't looking at Kennedy. They weren't looking at the students. They were heading straight for the front row. David Miller froze. He looked around, confused. What is this? I'm an attorney. You can't... The lead agent, a woman with a badge hanging from her neck, stepped up to him. David Miller? Yes, and I demand to know. David Miller, you are under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to violate the Federal Housing Act. A gasp ripped through the room. What? David stammered. That's ridiculous. My wife. This isn't about your wife, sir, the agent said, spinning him around. Though her arrest did give us the probable cause to seize her electronic devices. It seems you and your wife shared a cloud account, and she kept very detailed notes on the bribes your firm was paying to local officials to overlook your discriminatory housing practices, and the money you were funneling from the Aviation Fuel Consortium. David Miller's face went white. The cloud account, the texts, the recording. Brenda hadn't just recorded her own meltdown. Her phone, which Kennedy had insisted Officer Higgins seize as evidence, was synced to the family's entire digital life. When the police accessed it to investigate the bomb threat, they found everything. The housing discrimination raid Reginald had mentioned was just the tip of the iceberg. They had found the financial crimes. Chase Miller stood on stage, watching his father get handcuffed. He looked at Kennedy. He looked terrified. Kennedy didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched. You have the right to remain silent, the agent recited as they marched David Miller out of the auditorium, past the stunned crowd, past the cameras that were now broadcasting live to the world. Reginald stood up from his seat. He buttoned his jacket. He looked across the aisle at the empty chair where David Miller had been sitting. He walked over to the stage, reached up, and took Kennedy's hand. "Come on, Bean," he said softly. "I think you won the round." 6 months later, the Miami sun was just as hot as it had been on the day Kennedy Washington tried to board Flight 492, but the world for the Miller family had become a very cold place. The federal courthouse in Miami was packed. The fall of the Miller Empire, as the tabloids had dubbed it, was the story of the year. It had everything: aviation drama, racial profiling, high-stakes corporate fraud, and a climax caught on a teenager's viral video. Kennedy sat in the gallery, her father, Reginald, by her side. She didn't have to be there. Her testimony had been given in a deposition weeks ago, but she felt a need to see the end of the story she had unwillingly started. Brenda Miller sat at the defense table. She looked unrecognizable. The leopard print and expensive jewelry were gone, replaced by a drab grey suit. Her hair, once dyed a fierce blonde, was showing grey roots. She looked small, shrunken by the weight of the federal machinery she had tried to weaponize. Next to her sat David Miller. He looked even worse. The confident, slick lawyer from the debate tournament was gone. In his place was a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His assets were frozen. His firm had dissolved. His reputation was radioactive. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Alvarez, shuffled her papers. The courtroom went silent. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," Justice Alvarez began, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "This case is a tragedy of arrogance. You, Mrs. Miller, attempted to use the mechanisms of national security to settle a petty grievance over an airline seat. You treated a fellow human being as an obstacle to your comfort, and when she didn't move, you tried to destroy her life." Brenda sobbed quietly into a tissue. "And you, Mr. Miller," the judge continued, turning her gaze to David, "you used your wife's actions not as a wake-up call, but as a platform to further your own hateful agenda and to obstruct justice. But ironically, it was your own hubris that undid you. The electronic devices you fought so hard to keep from the police, the very devices your wife used to record her false accusations, contained the evidence of years of housing discrimination and financial fraud." Kennedy watched them. She expected to feel triumph, a surge of victory. Instead, she just felt a quiet relief. The system, so often broken, had worked. But it had only worked because she had the resources to make it work. "Brenda Miller," the judge announced, "for the charge of making a false bomb threat and assault, you are sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation. You are permanently placed on the federal no-fly list." The gavel banged. Brenda let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. "David Miller," the judge continued, "for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to violate the Fair Housing Act, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison." The gavel banged again. As the marshals moved in to cuff them, David Miller looked back at the gallery. His eyes scanned the room until they found Reginald Washington. Reginald didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply looked at David with a terrifying calmness. He raised one finger and tapped the side of his temple, a reminder. "You thought you were smart, but you forgot to check the name." The ripple effect. The consequences didn't stop at the prison gates. The Miller effect rippled outward, touching everyone who had played a part in that day on the tarmac. Patricia, the flight attendant who had been so ready to kick Kennedy off the plane, found herself in a different kind of uniform. Atlantic Air had fired her for failure to de-escalate and violation of passenger safety protocols after the internal investigation revealed she had ignored Kennedy's valid ticket to appease Brenda. 6 months later, Kennedy was walking through a terminal in Chicago for a college visit. She stopped at a coffee kiosk. The The woman handing her the latte looked familiar. It was Patricia. She looked tired. She wasn't flying to Paris or Rome anymore. She was grinding espresso beans for minimum wage. Patricia looked up and froze. She recognized Kennedy instantly, the girl who had ended her career. Kennedy took the coffee. She could have said something snide. She could have complained to the manager. Instead, she just looked at Patricia and said, "Thank you. Keep the change." She walked away, leaving Patricia standing there, clutching a $5 tip, burning with the shame of knowing she had chosen the wrong side. The good apple. Then there was Officer Higgins. The internal review of the Port Authority police had been grueling. Higgins had been scrutinized for why he didn't arrest Brenda immediately, but the body cam footage saved him. It showed him listening, checking the ID, and ultimately making the arrest despite the pressure from a wealthy white woman. He wasn't fired. In fact, he was promoted to sergeant. He became the face of a new training program for airport security, bias awareness and de-escalation. One afternoon, a package arrived at the precinct for Sergeant Higgins. He opened it to find a handwritten note on heavy, cream-colored stationery. "Sergeant Higgins, thank you for seeing the truth when it mattered. Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching, or when everyone is screaming at you to do the wrong thing. Stay safe. Kennedy A. Washington." Inside the box was a set of gold cufflinks. They were engraved with the scales of justice. Higgins smiled, closing the box. He kept them in his locker as a reminder. The final ascent 3 years later. Kennedy Washington stood at the podium of the Harvard Law Review banquet. She was older now, her braids replaced by a sleek bob, her presence even more commanding. She was the first black woman to be named president of the Review in a decade. The room was filled with the legal elite, judges, senators, partners at major firms. "We talk a lot about the law as a shield," Kennedy said into the microphone. "We talk about it as a sword. But the law is really a mirror. It reflects who we are. It reflects who we value." She looked out at the crowd. In the back, her father, Reginald, raised a glass of champagne to her. "I learned this lesson on a tarmac in Miami," Kennedy continued. "I learned that your name, your status, your background, it shouldn't determine your dignity. But until the world changes, we have to fight for every inch of that dignity. We have to be the rock that the waves break against." She paused, smiling slightly. "And if someone tries to move you from your seat, you make sure they understand exactly who they are talking to." The room erupted in applause. Kennedy stepped down from the stage. She walked over to her father. "Ready to go, Dad?" "Always been. We have a flight to catch." "First class?" she asked. Reginald laughed. "Is there any other way?" They walked out into the cool Cambridge night. The world was still complicated. There were still Brenda Millers out there, waiting to complain, waiting to judge, waiting to call the police. But Kennedy wasn't afraid of them anymore. She knew the secret. She knew that hate was loud, but truth was heavier, and she had the heaviest name in the book. And that is the story of how one woman's entitlement ran headfirst into a wall of justice named Kennedy Washington. It's a powerful reminder that when you try to dig a grave for someone else, you usually end up falling into it yourself. The Millers lost their freedom, their fortune, and their reputation, all because they couldn't handle a black teenager sitting in a seat she paid for. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice served, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to treat people with respect. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Have you ever seen a Karen get shut down in real life? I want to hear your stories. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind or be quiet.